She changed the locks on my own penthouse, the one I built, the one she grew up in. And she told me, "Dad, it's time you stop pretending you own this place." That's how my daughter ended 45 years of legacy with a locksmith and a lawyer. My name is Richard Langston, 74 years old. For decades, I ran Langston Financial, the kind of firm where every handshake was worth $1 million. And every view from my penthouse window reminded me that I'd climbed higher than the boy who once swept floors in Brooklyn ever dreamed. I buried my wife Eleanor 6 years ago. Since then, my world has been quiet, stock tickers, coffee, and the echo of her favorite piano piece I can't bring myself to play. I believed I'd raised a daughter who understood legacy. I was wrong. The elevator doors opened to the marble hallway of the 48th floor, and for a moment I thought there had been some mistake. My initials, RL, were still etched into the brass plaque beside the door. The scent of cedar polish, Eleanor's favorite, still lingered from our last renovation before cancer took her. But there it was, a new biometric lock, blinking red where my key once fit. A young security guard blocked me. "Mr. Langston." "I'm sorry, but Ms. Langston instructed us not to let anyone in without clearance." Ms. Langston, my own daughter. The name that once made me proud now landed like a slap. Behind the guard, the elevator opened again. Victoria stepped out in a white cashmere coat, sunglasses perched on her headphone, pressed to her ear like she was sealing another deal. "Dad," she sighed, not even pretending to be surprised. "You shouldn't be here. Evan and I already moved your things to the suite downtown." "My things?" I asked quietly. "Victoria, this is my home." She gave that little sympathetic smile people use when they're lying to themselves. "Technically, it's under Cooper Holdings now. Evan merged the titles after your last hospitalization. You signed the transfer documents yourself." I remembered that weak hospital lights morphine haze, my hand trembling as she guided the pen. "You said it was temporary," I whispered. "Dad, you were barely walking. You needed care, not square footage." Then she turned to the guard. "Please escort him to the car. He'll be more comfortable at Golden Harbor. They specialize in luxury elder suites. You'll love it there." Her tone was smooth, practiced corporate compassion. I looked past her shoulder into the penthouse, the grand piano Eleanor used to play the oil painting I'd commissioned from Florence, the walnut desk, where I wrote every business plan that built our fortune. Now I wasn't even allowed to step inside. When the elevator doors closed, the reflection staring back wasn't a billionaire or a founder or even a father. Just an old man holding keys that no longer opened anything. The ride down felt endless. Outside, the wind howled across Fifth Avenue. The driver, someone Evan had sent, held the door open for me like a funeral attendant. As the skyline blurred past, I thought about how quietly power slips away. Not with shouting, not with betrayal screamed across boardrooms, but with signatures written in trust. At 74, I had survived market crashes, mergers, lawsuits, and losing the love of my life. But nothing prepared me for the day my daughter decided I was an asset to liquidate. The Golden Harbor retirement suites gleamed like a 5-star hotel chandelier's concierge marble floors. But to me it felt like exile in disguise. They called it independent living with luxury support. I called it a cage with room service. The nurse who greeted me smiled politely. "Mr. Langston, your daughter spared no expense. You have the deluxe suite, ocean view, private chef, gym membership included." I nodded, but inside I felt the slow, humiliating weight of being managed. That night, I stood by the window watching the city I once ruled sparkle beneath me. Everything still looked the same, the skyline, the lights, the rhythm, except for me. For the first time, I wasn't at the top looking down. I was outside looking in. And somewhere in that glittering tower with my name still on it, my daughter and her husband were toasting to their new chapter, unaware that I wasn't broken, just quiet. Quiet enough to start thinking. Because when a man like me loses everything, he doesn't grieve. He plans. Before we go any further, tell me, where are you watching from today? I'd love to know where this story finds you, because what happened next changed everything I thought I knew about family, money, and love. The Golden Harbor Suite looked like a 5-star hotel room. On the surface, white orchids, on the nightstand, ocean view, balcony, marble bathroom. But beneath all that shine, it smelled faintly of antiseptic and loneliness. Every piece of furniture was too new, too polished, too impersonal. It felt like someone had staged a life for me, but forgotten to include a heartbeat. I sat on the bed and opened the small leather notebook I'd brought from home, the same one my wife Eleanor had given me years ago. For your important thoughts, she'd written inside the cover. Funny. I hadn't opened it in 6 years, not since the day she died. That first night, I wrote 3 sentences. Victoria took my home. Evan took my name. I gave them both the power to do it. I wasn't ready to call it betrayal, yet not allowed, not even in ink, because admitting that meant I'd failed twice, once as a businessman who signed papers without reading the fine print, and once as a father who raised a child who saw inheritance as leverage. Morning came wrapped in ocean light. The nurse knocked gently before entering. "Good morning, Mr. Langston. Breakfast is served downstairs. Chef's special is lobster omelet." I forced a smile. "Thank you." I used to start my mornings with conference calls and market updates. Now my only appointment was with a tray of fruit cut into symmetrical cubes. When I reached the dining hall, it was filled with well-dressed residents, former executives, surgeons, professors, all pretending they weren't waiting to die. Some still wore cufflinks, others pearls, but their eyes all had the same dull glaze of people who used to matter. That's when I met Father Samuel. He sat alone by the window, wearing a plain gray sweater, stirring his coffee without drinking it. "Seat taken?" I asked. He looked up, smiled faintly. "Not unless you believe in ownership." I laughed for the first time in days. "Richard Langston," I said, offering my hand. "Samuel Grant, retired clergyman, failed golfer, occasional counselor to lost souls." "Then you'll be busy here," I replied. He studied me for a moment. "You're new. I can tell by the way you look at the exit more than the view." He wasn't wrong. We talked. Or rather, he listened. I told him about Victoria, about the papers, about waking up one day to realize that success had outlived its purpose. He didn't interrupt, just nodded. Finally, he said quietly, "Sometimes God doesn't take your comfort away. He takes your illusions." I frowned. Meaning, maybe this isn't punishment, Richard. Maybe it's revelation. Later that afternoon, I received a delivery, 1 box labeled personal effects. Inside were only what my daughter thought I deserved. 3 suits, a framed photograph of Eleanor and my Patek Philippe. Watch the one I'd given myself on our 25th anniversary. The frame cracked in one corner, glass missing. I traced Eleanor's smile with my finger. She'd warned me years ago, "Victoria loves your ambition, not your humility. Don't let her inherit both. I laughed back then, proud of how capable our daughter had become. Now her ambition had devoured everything, including humility. I called the front desk. Could you tell me who authorized my transfer here? According to our records, the attendant said your daughter, Mrs. Cooper. She's listed as your financial proxy. All expenses billed directly to Cooper Holdings. Proxy. That single word told me everything I needed to know, that somewhere between grief and trust, I had signed my autonomy away. That night I couldn't sleep. The sound of waves below mixed with faint piano notes from the lobby. It reminded me of Eleanor again, how she used to play Chopin whenever she needed to think. I walked to the balcony and stared into the dark water. For the first time in my 74 years, I felt powerless. Not poor, I still had more wealth than most would see in a lifetime, but powerless. Because wealth without control is just another kind of prison. I whispered, Eleanor, if you can hear me, give me a sign. The wind rose, gently cool and salt-sweet, brushing against my face like a hand I'd once known. Maybe it was foolish. Maybe not. But standing there with the city lights trembling on the waves below, I realized something that cut deeper than betrayal. I had trusted in money my entire life, but not in meaning. And meaning, it seemed, was the only thing my daughter couldn't steal. That night before closing the notebook, I wrote one more line: God doesn't abandon the rich or the poor, only the proud. Then I underlined it twice. For the first time since Eleanor's funeral, I said a quiet prayer. Not for justice, for strength. Because maybe Father Samuel was right, maybe God hadn't taken my comfort. Maybe he'd simply taken away my illusion that I was still in control. 3 days after my arrival at Golden Harbor, the mail clerk delivered a thick white envelope. Return address, Langston Capital Holdings, the firm my daughter and her husband had founded under my name. The letterhead looked familiar, the same gold-embossed crest I'd designed decades ago when Langston Financial first opened on Wall Street. Only now the signature at the bottom didn't belong to me. It belonged to Victoria Langston Cooper, CEO. My stomach tightened. The letter stated in the polite tone of corporate betrayal that I had been relieved of fiduciary duties effective immediately, and that all residual holdings are being consolidated into the new management structure. Translation: We've taken everything, and there's nothing you can do about it. I sat there for a long time staring at the paper. Then I laughed. Not out of amusement, out of disbelief. 45 years of empire, and it ended with a memo. That afternoon, I took a taxi downtown, telling the driver to stop 2 blocks away from my old headquarters. The building still bore my name carved in limestone above the revolving doors, Langston Tower. From across the street, I watched through the glass as my daughter swept through the lobby, heels clicking like a metronome of power. The young receptionist didn't recognize me. She called security before I'd even reached the elevators. I didn't fight it. I just smiled and said, "Tell Ms. Langston her father dropped by to say hello." By the time I reached the curb, my phone buzzed. It was Victoria. "Dad, you can't just show up unannounced," she said, her tone clipped. "This isn't your company anymore." "I noticed," I replied. "You've been busy. The rebranding looks efficient." "Don't be sarcastic, please. We're doing what's best for the family legacy by removing the family part." There was a pause. Then her voice softened the way people speak when they think they're being kind while twisting the knife. "Dad, you built something amazing, but times change. We're modernizing. Evan says you don't need to worry about the numbers anymore. I almost smiled. Evan always did have a gift for numbers, especially when they belonged to someone else. She didn't respond. That evening, I called Samuel Nguyen, a financial attorney recommended by one of my old colleagues. Her voice was sharp, calm, efficient, the kind of person who saw numbers the way surgeons saw anatomy. "Mr. Langston, I reviewed the documents you sent," she said. "Your daughter and son-in-law transferred 68% of your holdings to Cooper Holdings via a rolling trust amendment. Technically, it's legal, but ethically," she paused, "it's textbook financial abuse." I exhaled. "So I've been robbed politely." "Precisely." She hesitated before continuing. "Mr. Langston, do you want justice or do you want your family back?" "I want both," I said quietly. "But one may have to wait for the other." The next morning, I took my breakfast alone in the dining hall. Father Samuel joined me, sliding a cup of black coffee my way. "You look like a man who's just seen the fine print on his own life," he said. I handed him the letter. He read it slowly, then looked up. "They've taken your name and my trust. Then perhaps it's time to start taking things back." I smiled. "You sound more like a strategist than a priest." He chuckled softly. "God works in mysterious markets." Later that day, I asked Samuel to meet me in person. We sat in the Golden Harbor Lounge, surrounded by retirees pretending not to eavesdrop. She opened her laptop. "Here's what we can do. You still retain 32% of the original firm through silent partnerships. That means you have standing to audit. We'll start there. Quietly. No confrontation yet." Why quietly? Because revenge makes noise. Justice moves in silence. That line stayed with me. She handed me a folder. "We'll need time, patience, and evidence. Once we trace the transfers, we'll decide whether to file under elder exploitation or breach of fiduciary duty." Sounds like a plan. She leaned back. "You're unusually calm for a man who's just lost millions." "I've lost worse," I said. "I lost respect, and that takes longer to rebuild than money." That evening I wrote in my notebook again. "They think I'm defeated because I'm old. They forget I invented their game." I could almost hear Eleanor's voice in my head. "Don't let bitterness guide your hand, Richard. Make your justice precise." Outside my window, Manhattan glowed gold against the night. Somewhere in that glow, my daughter was raising a glass of champagne, celebrating her brilliance. And somewhere beneath it, I was quietly calculating how to dismantle everything she'd built, one signature at a time. Because betrayal is only perfect until the betrayed decides to get even. By the end of that week, the audit reports began trickling in. Samuel had a way of making the impossible look routine. Line by line, she dissected the empire I had once built, the one now wearing my daughter's name like stolen jewelry. What she found wasn't just mismanagement. It was surgical theft. Victoria had liquidated $2.4 million in blue-chip stocks to fund a company in the Hamptons called Aurora Estates, LLC, a real estate venture that existed only on paper. The address led to a $12 million beachfront mansion registered to Evan Cooper. My daughter's signature was on every wire transfer. "Evan used her access to your accounts as collateral," Samuel explained, flipping through statements. "And when the lenders demanded more, she leveraged your name again. Half of Cooper Holdings' credit is still guaranteed by your retirement trust." I stared at the numbers. They blurred together, but one phrase stood out: private lenders. 19.6% APR. Loan sharks in designer suits. They weren't just playing with money anymore. They were gambling with my legacy. That evening my phone buzzed. Victoria. Her face filled the screen, perfect makeup, perfect lighting, as if betrayal needed good exposure. Dad. I heard you've been calling lawyers, she said, smiling tightly. Please tell me you're not letting paranoia ruin what we're building. What you're building, Victoria, I corrected. And I'm not paranoid. I'm observant. Dad, don't start. She sighed, switching her tone to the sweet, performative affection she used at charity galas. You taught me to be ambitious. Evan and I are expanding the brand. Langston Capital will be global within 2 years. You should be proud. Proud, I said quietly. You've turned integrity into inventory. Her eyes narrowed. You're being dramatic. Then explain Aurora Estates and why my name guarantees $5 million in private debt. The smile faltered. You shouldn't have access to those files. Answer me. Dad, you're retired. You're not supposed to worry about these things. I almost laughed. You've mistaken silence for surrender, Victoria. They're not the same. Her voice sharpened. Don't threaten me. I'm not threatening you, I said. I'm warning you. And then I hung up. 2 hours later, I received another call, this time from Father Samuel. I don't know what you're planning, Richard, he said gently, but I can hear the storm in your voice even through the phone. She's taken everything I built. Maybe. But the question isn't what she took, it's what you still have. What I still have. I repeated, staring at the city lights through my window. Then it hit me. There was one thing Victoria didn't know existed: the Eleanor account, a private offshore reserve Eleanor and I had created decades ago, originally for charity work never declared, publicly forgotten by everyone except me. $7.3 million, clean, untouched, waiting. The next morning I called Samuel. We move now, I said. Quietly. Set up a holding trust under a new name, Eleanor Trust Holdings. Transfer everything from the old accounts. I want it invisible. Done, she said. But may I ask why now? Because my daughter thinks she owns every dollar I ever made. It's time to remind her what she never earned. Samuel smiled faintly. You're planning something. Not revenge, I said. Education. Meanwhile, Victoria's empire began to wobble. Aurora Estates construction permits were delayed. Investors grew suspicious of missing funds. And the private lenders, the kind who don't send emails, only men in suits with smiles that don't reach their eyes, started calling. At a dinner party in Midtown, she bragged about expanding the Langston legacy. Just as the news alert hit her phone, Cooper Holdings faces SEC inquiry over fund transfers. Witnesses said she dropped her wine glass before anyone could toast. I didn't gloat. I just sat in my suite flipping through her company's latest public filing. On page 4, one sentence stood out: primary guarantor Richard E. Langston. I underlined it and whispered, "Not anymore." That night I opened my notebook and wrote, "She thought she had taken everything. But the only thing she truly lost was the right to my silence." I looked at Eleanor's photo on the nightstand and smiled. "Darling," I whispered, "I'm about to give our daughter the education she never asked for and desperately needs. If you're still with me, type 1 in the comments. I want to know you're walking this road with me, because what comes next isn't just about money. It's about justice and faith that sometimes the fall is what saves us." The next morning, I woke before sunrise. Manhattan was still asleep. Only the river shimmered like liquid steel under a gray dawn. The city I'd once dominated now looked distant, indifferent. But as I stood by the window sipping black coffee that tasted like resolve, I realized something. My daughter had taken my company, my home, and my name. But she had not taken my instinct. And instinct, when sharpened by age and betrayal, becomes something more powerful than ambition. It becomes strategy. At 9 sharp, I met Samuel Nguyen in the corner lounge of Golden Harbor. She came dressed in black, no frills, no jewelry, laptop already open before she sat down. "Mr. Langston," she said, "the Eleanor Trust is live. Registered offshore under a clean entity. 7.3 million secured. No traceable link to your existing accounts." I nodded. "Good. It's time to make our first move." Samuel raised an eyebrow. "You're ready to go public? Not yet. I want silence to be my weapon." She smiled slightly. "You know, most clients your age want peace." "I had peace," I replied. Then my daughter mistook it for weakness. We spent the next 2 hours outlining the plan. Step 1. Acquire leverage through the Eleanor Trust. Samuel would quietly start purchasing debt from Cooper Holdings' private lenders. Essentially, she explained, you'll become your daughter's creditor. She'll owe you money without even knowing it. Poetic, I said. Eleanor would have liked that. Step 2. Buy the battlefield. The Langston Tower, my former headquarters, had been refinanced twice. Samuel's research showed it was vulnerable to a cash offer. "Liquidate $2 million from the Eleanor Trust," I ordered. "I want the building by next month." "That's a bold move," she said. "Are you sure you want to own the place your daughter thinks she runs?" "Exactly," I said. "Because when the truth comes, I want her to look up and realize the ground beneath her feet was mine all along." That afternoon, I visited Father Samuel in the garden behind the residence. He was trimming roses, hands, steady face, calm, the smell of cut grass and salt air mixing in the breeze. He didn't look up when he spoke. "You've been busy, Richard." I smiled faintly. "Word travels fast in small sanctuaries. Justice can be righteous," he said softly. "But if it turns to vengeance, it poisons the hand that pours it." I looked at the roses, some blooming, some withering. "She took everything, Father. My wife's memory, my legacy." He nodded. "And yet you're still breathing, planning, thinking." "Maybe she didn't take as much as you think. I want her to understand consequences," I said. "Not pain, just reality." Samuel finally looked at me. "That's the difference between revenge and redemption," he said. "One ends the story, the other rewrites it." I considered his words for a long moment. "Maybe this isn't revenge then. Maybe it's education." He smiled gently. "Then teach wisely." By evening, the wheels were already turning. Samuel's team had reached 2 of the private lenders, both eager to offload Cooper Holdings' risky debt. In 48 hours, the Eleanor Trust would hold controlling interest in more than $3 million of my daughter's outstanding loans. In short, she now owed her father money and didn't even know it. For the first time since being locked out of my penthouse, I felt the pulse of control again. It wasn't ego. It was equilibrium, the world finally tilting back toward balance. I poured myself a glass of Macallan 18 and opened Eleanor's notebook. Inside, between her old recipes and sketches, was a quote she'd written years ago. "Forgive with grace, but correct with firmness. Mercy means nothing without boundaries." I whispered it aloud. Boundaries. Yes. That's what she never learned. I looked out at the skyline again. Somewhere in the glowing grid of Manhattan, Victoria was probably sipping champagne at another investor dinner, bragging about her growth strategy. She didn't know that growth had a silent partner now, and that the next board meeting would include a ghost she thought she'd buried. I smiled not out of cruelty, but closure. Because she'd been right about one thing: I didn't belong at the top anymore. But I was about to own everything below it. That night, I knelt beside my bed for the first time in years. The city roared outside, but inside that quiet room, I whispered a simple prayer. Lord, let my justice be clean. Let it heal, not destroy. Then I rose, calm and steady. Because tomorrow the education of Victoria Langston would officially begin, and her teacher had just reacquired the classroom. 2 weeks later, Manhattan glittered like a diamond, perfect, deceptive, expensive. From the street below, the Langston Tower looked the same: spotless, glass-polished marble security guards in tailored suits. But inside, everything had changed. The ownership papers had been signed. Through Eleanor Trust Holdings, I now owned 100% of the building that bore my name and my daughter's arrogance. Samuel handed me the final document that morning. It's done, she said simply. The tower is yours again, legally and quietly. No announcement, no press. She won't find out until she needs to. When will that be? I asked. She smiled. Tonight, at her gala. That evening, Victoria hosted a launch event for Langston Global, her latest rebranding attempt, a desperate effort to attract new investors before the SEC inquiry caught up. The invitation list included hedge fund managers, media executives, and more photographers than ethics. The ballroom of my old penthouse glowed gold under chandeliers imported from Vienna. I stood in the back corner, unnoticed among the sea of tailored suits and champagne. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was a ghost at my own party. Victoria looked stunning, of course, elegance manufactured to perfection. Her husband, Evan, played host with his usual slick charm, shaking hands and promising returns he couldn't deliver. When the lights dimmed and the string quartet faded, Victoria took the stage. Tonight, she announced, we celebrate the next chapter of Langston Global, a name that stands for innovation, integrity, and legacy. I almost laughed. Integrity. She said it with such conviction, I almost believed she didn't know what the word meant. But before the applause could fade, the doors opened. A team of 3 walked in, not security, not investors, Samuel and her associates carrying folders stamped with the seal of Eleanor Trust Holdings. The room murmured. Victoria frowned. I'm sorry, this is a private event. Samuel stepped forward, calm and deliberate. Ms. Langston Cooper, on behalf of Eleanor Trust Holdings, we're here to deliver official notice of ownership change for this property and its associated business assets. The microphone caught every word. For a moment, the only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioning. Then came the whispers, the shifting of chairs, the clicking of camera shutters. What are you talking about? Victoria stammered. Samuel handed her the documents. Effective as of this morning, full ownership of the Langston Tower has been transferred to Eleanor Trust Holdings. Victoria flipped through the pages, her perfectly manicured hand trembling. This is impossible. Who owns Eleanor Trust? I stepped forward. I do. The entire room turned, her face drained of color. Dad. I walked slowly toward the stage, each step deliberate, steady, like the closing of a ledger. I told you once that silence shouldn't be mistaken for surrender. You didn't listen. Dad, you can't just... This is illegal. No, I said quietly. This is justice. Legal, precise, and long overdue. Evan tried to intervene, his voice rising. You can't just show up and humiliate her like this. I looked at him, the man who taught my daughter how to weaponize ambition. Humiliation isn't my goal, Evan. Illumination is. You both spent years confusing greed with greatness. Tonight the lights simply came on. Reporters' whispered flashes went off. Victoria stood frozen tears, threatening to ruin her mascara. I built this tower with my own 2 hands, I continued. You tried to take it from me in the name of modernization. Now I've taken it back in the name of integrity. Dad, please, she whispered, voice cracking. You don't have to do this in front of everyone. Correction, I said softly. I have to do this for everyone. Because every empire that forgets where it came from deserves to be reminded. I turned to the audience. Ladies and gentlemen, as of tonight, the Langston Tower will operate under a new name, the Eleanor Trust. Its purpose to rebuild what greed destroyed, to restore what money cannot buy dignity. Applause rippled, hesitant at first, then stronger. Victoria stepped back, shaking her head. You ruined me. I looked at her gently. No, Victoria, I released you from the lie that power defines worth. She began to cry, and for the first time I didn't feel anger, only pity. Later that night, when the guests had gone and the lights dimmed, I stood alone by the balcony where Eleanor and I used to watch the city. The same view, but a different kind of peace. Father Samuel's words echoed in my mind. Justice without mercy is just revenge in disguise. I whispered into the quiet. You were right, Father. Mercy doesn't mean letting them win. It means letting God see that I acted clean. The wind swept through the room, carrying the faint scent of Eleanor's old perfume. And I smiled, because for the first time in years, I felt her presence not as grief, but as grace. That night I prayed again, not for victory, but for wisdom. Because faith, I finally understood, isn't what you cling to when you lose. It's what steadies your hand when it's time to take back what's yours. The news spread faster than I expected. By morning, every business paper in New York had the same headline, Langston Tower under new ownership, founder reclaims legacy. Some called it poetic justice. Others called it revenge. To me, it was simply correction. But for Victoria and Evan, it was a reckoning. By noon, their investors began withdrawing. The stock price of Cooper Holdings dropped 37% before trading even closed. Reporters camped outside their penthouse, my former home, shouting questions about forged documents and missing funds. Samuel called me mid-afternoon. Richard, you should see this, she said, forwarding a photo. Victoria, standing on the steps of the tower, surrounded by reporters, mascara streaked, shouting, "This isn't fair." The same phrase she used when she lost her first chess match as a child. Some lessons, it seemed, she'd never learned. That evening, the phone rang. Her voice was smaller this time. "Dad." "Can we talk always?" I said. She hesitated. "They froze our accounts." "The SEC is investigating. Evan says it's a misunderstanding, but..." Her voice cracked. "We can't access anything, even the children's school fund." "Do you need money?" Victoria silence. Then softly, "No, I need help." I met her the next day at the rooftop lounge of the Roosevelt Hotel, neutral ground, away from cameras and memories. She looked older, fragile, in a way that wealth can no longer hide. Evan didn't come. Maybe he was too proud, or maybe too scared. She started talking before I could sit down. Dad, I never meant for it to go this far. Evan said it was all structured, safe, legal. He said I was protecting your legacy, and you believed him. I wanted to. After Mom died, you shut down Dad. You buried yourself in silence. I thought taking control was what you wanted. I wanted you to be capable, not cruel. Tears welled in her eyes. I wasn't trying to hurt you. No, I said quietly. You were trying to become me. And in the process, you forgot who you were. She looked down at her hands, shaking. I'm going to lose everything, she whispered. I leaned back. Sometimes losing everything is the only way to find yourself again. Evan says we can file bankruptcy. I interrupted. Evan is done. Cooper Holdings will collapse within the month. The lenders you borrowed from are circling. Some are less forgiving than the banks. Her head snapped up. What do you mean? I hesitated. Let's just say your husband made deals with men who don't take IOUs. She covered her mouth, horrified. Oh, God. Exactly, I said. And that's why you need to listen carefully. I slid an envelope across the table. Inside were documents Samuel had prepared. Sign these, I said. You'll transfer full control of Cooper Holdings' remaining assets to the Eleanor Trust. In return, you'll be free from liability. You'll lose the company, but you'll keep your freedom. She looked at the papers, then at me. You'd take it all I already have. This is your chance to leave with your dignity intact. Why would you even offer that? After everything I did, I met her gaze. Because forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. It just gives you somewhere to start again. For a long time, she said nothing. Then she signed, hands trembling, ink smudging slightly on the final page. When she finished, she whispered, "What happens now?" Now the Eleanor Trust absorbs Cooper Holdings. We'll use the assets to fund programs for financial abuse prevention. The rest will go toward rebuilding what greed destroyed. And me. You'll report to Samuel for financial recovery counseling. No boardrooms, no investments, no deals. Just accountability. Learn what money is really worth when it's gone. She nodded slowly. And Evan, he'll have to face his own consequences. Samuel's already forwarded evidence to the authorities. Her face went pale. He'll hate you for this. I can live with that, I said. I couldn't live with watching you self-destruct. When she stood to leave, she hesitated. Dad, she whispered, do you still love me? I looked at her, truly looked, and saw not the CEO who'd stolen my empire, but the little girl who once fell asleep on my office couch while I worked late. I love you enough to let you face what you've done, I said softly. And enough to be here when you've changed. She turned away, shoulders trembling, and walked out into the rain. That night I sat in the chapel of Golden Harbor, the one Father Samuel tended quietly every evening. The candles flickered against the stained glass, casting warm shadows on the pews. You did what you had to, Samuel said, sliding into the seat beside me. I didn't punish her, I said. But I didn't save her either. He smiled faintly. Sometimes mercy is measured by what you don't destroy. I closed my eyes and exhaled. Outside, thunder rolled across the city, not a storm, just the sound of change. 3 months later, New York felt quieter. Maybe it was me. Maybe the city always sounded different when you stopped fighting it. The newspapers had long moved on. Cooper Holdings was bankrupt. Evan Cooper, my once charming son-in-law, was under federal investigation for fraud and misappropriation. The courts froze what was left of his accounts. The man who once bragged about playing the market was now playing for mercy. Victoria had disappeared from the headlines too. She'd moved into a small apartment near Central Park, modest by her standards, humble by anyone's. Every week she met with Samuel Nguyen, who now served as both her financial counselor and unofficial mentor. Samuel said she was doing the work, budgeting, therapy, volunteering. "Your daughter's learning the value of earning again," she'd said during one of our calls. "She's not the same woman." I wanted to believe her. But forgiveness isn't a transaction. It's a risk. That Friday, I found myself back at the Eleanor Trust headquarters, once the Langston Tower, now transformed. The marble floors remained, but the air felt different, lighter, cleaner. The logo on the wall no longer bore my initials, but Eleanor's handwriting, carved in silver integrity, is the interest love pays to time. Downstairs, a group of young interns were organizing donation drives for elderly victims of financial abuse. They greeted me with bright smiles and called me Mr. Langston. I smiled back, though I no longer felt like the man they imagined. We'd built something new from the ruins, and for the first time, I didn't want credit. I wanted peace. That afternoon, Father Samuel visited my office. He still dressed the same plain gray sweater shoes, a little too worn. He glanced around the renovated space and nodded approvingly. "You've turned a battlefield into a sanctuary," he said. "I just redirected the war," I replied. "From vengeance to purpose." He smiled. "And how's your daughter?" I hesitated. "Trying. She writes sometimes. Emails mostly, short ones. No apologies, just updates. Maybe she's still learning that remorse isn't spoken. It's lived." I nodded slowly. "I want to see her again, Father, but I don't know if I'm ready." He leaned forward. "You don't forgive to erase the wound, Richard. You forgive to stop bleeding." That night, as if summoned by his words, my phone buzzed. "Victoria," her message was simple. "Dad, I'd like to see you. Just talk." Tomorrow, the foundation garden. For a long time, I just stared at the screen, wondering if closure was worth reopening old pain. Then I typed back, "Tomorrow, noon." The next day, the foundation garden was in full bloom, rows of white roses, Eleanor's favorite. The city hummed faintly beyond the walls, distant but present. Victoria was already there, waiting by the fountain. She looked human again. No designer sunglasses, no entourage. Just a woman who had finally met herself in the mirror. "Dad," she said softly. "Victoria." There was a long silence, broken only by the sound of water trickling over stone. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. Inside was a check, small compared to what she'd once handled, but significant enough to mean something. "I've been saving from my job at the community center," she said, eyes downcast. "It's not much, but I want to contribute to the foundation. I want to do something right, even if it's late." I looked at the check, then at her trembling hands. And for the first time I saw my daughter, not the thief, not the betrayer, but the lost child who finally wanted to come home. I handed the envelope back. "Keep it. Use it to build something of your own. Something clean." Tears filled her eyes. "Dad, no one deserves forgiveness," I said gently. "That's why it's grace." She stepped closer, hesitated, then hugged me. It wasn't the tight, performative embrace of public appearances. It was shaky, raw, real. And it felt like exhaling after years of holding my breath. When she pulled away, I could see a flicker of the girl Eleanor used to call our little sunrise. "Will you ever trust me again?" she asked. I thought for a moment. Trust is built like wealth, Victoria. Slowly. But I'm willing to invest again. She smiled through tears. I'll earn it. I know you will. As she walked away, Father Samuel appeared at the garden gate. He didn't speak, just watched her leave, then turned to me. You gave her something no court ever could, he said. What's that, a future? That evening, as the sun slipped behind the Manhattan skyline, I sat alone in the garden. The roses glowed gold in the fading light. I took Eleanor's locket from my pocket, opened it, and whispered, "She's learning love. Slowly, but she's learning." For the first time in years, the ache in my chest felt lighter. Not gone, just lighter. Because dignity isn't something you demand. It's something you rebuild one act of grace at a time. Spring came quietly that year. The first warm breeze through the foundation gardens carried the scent of renewal, damp soil roses, and something that smelled almost like forgiveness. Every Friday morning, I walked those paths before sunrise, the same hour Eleanor used to pray by our window. Only this time, the prayers weren't for redemption. They were for gratitude. It had been 6 months since that afternoon in the garden. Victoria was rebuilding her life slowly but steadily. She'd started a small nonprofit second ledger focused on helping families recover from financial exploitation. Irony, perhaps, but also poetry. When I saw her first brochure printed in simple black letters, the tagline caught my eye. Integrity is the only currency that never devalues. I couldn't help but smile. She was quoting me. Samuel told me Victoria still attended every counseling session, now volunteering to mentor others. She's finally learned, Samuel said, that wealth isn't measured in zeros. It's measured in sleep and peace. Peace. A word I used to mock. Now it was all I wanted. One afternoon, as I was reviewing reports in the Eleanor Trust office, the receptionist buzzed me. "Mr. Langston, there's a young woman here to see you. Says her name is Lily Cooper." It took me a moment to remember. Victoria's daughter. My granddaughter. I hadn't seen her since she was 8. When she walked in, I almost didn't recognize her, tall, confident, with her mother's eyes, but Eleanor's gentleness. She held out a notebook. "Mom said you might like this." Inside were drawings, her sketches of the foundation, the garden, the people we'd helped. One page stopped me cold, a portrait of Eleanor standing by the roses, smiling. "I never met Grandma," Lily said softly, "but Mom talks about her now. Says she used to believe love wasn't just something you feel, it's something you fund." I laughed quietly. "That sounds like her. She also said you taught her what that really means," Lily continued. "And she's sorry for everything." I nodded, my throat tightening. I know she is. We walked through the garden together. Lily asked about Eleanor, what she was like, what she believed, what she dreamed about. I told her everything. How Eleanor used to hum while balancing the foundation ledgers. How she called every donation a conversation with God. How she believed legacy wasn't about what you left behind. It was about what you set in motion. Lily listened intently, then smiled. "I want to work here someday. At the foundation." "You already do," I said, pointing to her sketchbook. "That's the first step." That evening, Victoria came by to pick her up. She looked different again, lighter. The sharp edges were gone, replaced by quiet purpose. "I didn't want to intrude," she said softly. Lily insisted on coming. "I'm glad she did," I replied. She reminded me that our story doesn't have to end where it broke. Victoria smiled a little sadly. Sometimes it takes losing everything to realize what really mattered. Your mother used to say that every storm leaves behind clean ground, I said. Then maybe she whispered, we're finally ready to plant something new. She glanced toward the garden where Lily was tracing Eleanor's name on the memorial plaque. Tears welled in Victoria's eyes. I thought I'd ruined her too. You didn't ruin her, I said. You gave her a front row seat to redemption. That's an education no school can buy. Later that night, after they'd gone, I sat alone under the lanterns in the garden. The city hummed beyond the gates, taxis, laughter, the restless pulse of life. But in that walled piece of earth, there was only stillness. I looked up at the sky and whispered, Eleanor, it worked. She found her way back. And so did I. The wind stirred the roses, soft and fragrant. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe not. But I could swear the air itself seemed to answer, grace always returns home. The next morning, I signed the final amendment to the Foundation's charter. It no longer bore just my name. It now read, the Eleanor and Victoria Trust for Generations of Integrity. A new legacy. Not built on profit, but on repentance, renewal, and peace earned the hard way. And for the first time in 75 years, I didn't feel like a man at the end of his story. I felt like one who had finally begun to live it. The following Sunday morning, I woke to birdsong instead of alarms. No phone calls, no lawyers, no chaos. Just light, warm, and golden pouring through the curtains of my brownstone apartment. I sat by the window with a cup of black coffee watching the city stretch awake. For the first time in decades, I didn't feel the weight of what was lost. I felt the quiet fullness of what had been restored. The Eleanor and Victoria Trust had completed its first quarter under the new charter. Over 200 families were receiving aid, elderly couples defrauded by their own children, widows manipulated into bad loans, men and women who'd signed away their dignity for the illusion of love. When I visited the outreach center that week, a woman hugged me and said, "You gave us back hope, Mr. Langston." I smiled. "No, ma'am, you gave it back to yourself. We just reminded you where to look," and as I walked through the hallway lined with portraits of the people we'd helped, I realized something Eleanor used to say. God doesn't waste pain. He repurposes it. Every scar I'd carried, every betrayal, every sleepless night had found its place in this mosaic of mercy. That evening, I visited the chapel garden one last time before its reopening ceremony. The marble bench had been restored, and above it a bronze plaque now read, "Dedicated to Eleanor Langston, whose faith turned loss into legacy, and whose love taught us that forgiveness is freedom." I ran my fingers over the engraving and smiled. The sun dipped low, bathing the roses in amber light. Behind me, footsteps approached. It was Victoria holding a white rose. "She would have loved this," she said quietly. "She already does," I replied. Victoria placed the rose beneath the plaque and stood beside me in silence. No speeches, no apologies, just presence. That was enough. After a while, she turned to me. "Dad, I've been thinking about something." "What's that?" "I want to dedicate part of the Trust's next program to helping young people understand financial ethics before they make the mistakes I did." I smiled. "A preventive ministry." She laughed softly. "Call it what you want. I call it redemption. You've come a long way, Victoria." "So have you," she said. "You let go." I nodded. "Your mother would be proud." She looked at the plaque again. "I think she already is." That night, as I walked home under the city lights, I realized I wasn't haunted by Eleanor's absence anymore. I was accompanied by her presence in every act of restoration, in every person we helped, in every prayer whispered by someone who still believed in second chances. At 76, I no longer needed to build empires. I just wanted to build peace. And for the first time, I understood the true interest of grace. It compounds only when you give it away. Back at home, I opened Eleanor's old Bible, the one she'd marked with soft pencil notes. Between Psalms and Proverbs, I found a verse she'd underlined twice: "He restores my soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake." Psalm 23:3, I closed the book and whispered, "You did, Lord. You really did." The next morning, a letter arrived from Lily. A short note in looping handwriting. "Grandpa, Mom says you taught her that forgiveness isn't weakness, it's wisdom. She's teaching me the same thing now. I love you. See you at the garden this Sunday." I smiled, folded the letter, and tucked it inside Eleanor's Bible. Because that right there was grace returning home. I no longer prayed for justice or victory, only gratitude. For breath, for time, for the mercy of another sunrise. Because faith, I've learned, isn't believing God will stop the storm. It's trusting that He'll rebuild what it breaks. And He did. If this story touched, you don't leave without sharing it. Comment your thoughts, tell me where you're watching from, and subscribe to Brian Stories, where every voice, every scar, and every second chance reminds us it's never too late to rebuild your legacy.